Is it audible? So, yesterday we were talking about, is it audible, right, on the back? Yeah. So, yesterday we were talking about the economic impact, right? So, we'll discuss and we'll complete the economic impact today, okay? And when we talk about the economic impact, yesterday we had talked about the trade policy and we had started a discussion on the land revenue policy, right? So, did we write about the land revenue? So, the British introduced, okay. Yeah. So, we wrote about the key characteristics or the key characteristics or the key differences in the pre-British and the British revenue systems, right? Now we have discussed about the characteristics. Now let's go ahead and discuss about the different types, okay? Now, and then their impact. Impact we'll talk about. These are the characteristics. Impact we'll talk about once we talk about the different types of it, okay? So, there were 3 types of land revenue systems, and when we discuss the 3 types, you should first know that all of the 3 types were not introduced at the same time. They were introduced one after the other. Okay, they were not introduced at the same time, and we can discuss in the order in which they were introduced. The first attempt to introduce a new revenue collecting system was introduced in Bengal, because in Bengal, why in Bengal first? Because that is where they are establishing their presence, right? So, it is in Bengal, in the Bengal, Bihar and Odisha region, because that is what constituted Bengal then, okay. In the Bengal region, you see that they introduced what was the permanent settlement system, okay. Now, this is what was meant by the so what was meant by the permanent settlement system, we'll see. However, the permanent settlement system was introduced by whom? Anybody? So, now basically when we talk about the permanent settlement system, they can ask you a question in the prelims, for example, like this, where what does the word permanent mean in permanent settlement? Okay, so we'll discuss. So firstly, when we talk about what? When we talk about the first system, you have to understand that the first system is introduced in Bengal with the objective what? The same objective, to increase productivity and increase revenue collection. This system, we will see, does not increase productivity. And if productivity is not increasing, then revenue collection can increase, but only to a limit, not too much. Because if you want to increase collection without increasing productivity, you will have to increase tax rate, right? And tax rate increase would lead to revolts. So there were revolts, peasant revolts during British era. There were peasant revolts in pre-British era also, there were peasant revolts in British era also, and we'll see them. But when the system did not increase productivity, they tried the new system. And this system was what was called as the Rayatwari settlement system. Now, the Rayatwari settlement system was introduced, this is introduced in the 1790s. This is introduced in 1820s. The Rayatwari system was introduced by Thomas Munro and Reed, William Reed. Okay, so Munro and Reed, basically these were the individuals who introduced the Rayatwari system. Now the Rayatwari system was introduced in large parts of South India. And in fact, in a large number of areas, Rayatwari system was tried. Okay, the aim was that can it increase productivity? Then soon they realized even this is not increasing productivity. So in India's northwest, That is where they tried the third, Mahalwari. Now the Mahalwari system was introduced under the regime of William Bentinck. Now, the first thing to know is what? The first thing to know is that it's not that permanent settlement system was introduced here, it did not work, so they replaced it with Mahalwari or Rayatwari. No. Different areas of India had different revenue collection system and objective is the same. They tried different things in different areas to see what could work to increase productivity. But agricultural productivity did not increase. Why? All of that will become clear when we'll discuss. But this is a background you must know. You must know the names of who introduced which systems. This has been asked before in prelims examination also. Okay? They asked the question last year on Rayatwari system, who introduced. देखिए उसके पहले तक जब मैं पढ़ाता था तो मैं ये नहीं पढ़ाता था कि read was there. वो ऑप्शन में read आया तो मैंने जाके ढूंढा तो read was there. But even if you did not know, as many people did not knew then, that read was also there, even by knowing Munro, you could mark the answer. तो आंसर मार्क करने के लिए प्रीलिम्स में always it is not important that you must know everything. It is also important to exclude options. Mainly by exclusion you could find that there was no place where Munro and Reed were not together in any of the options. Meaning that obviously Reed is also going to be there in the answer. So ऐसे भी आप दिमाग लगा सकते हैं. Factual questions are always not done only by knowing the right answer. They are also done by eliminating options. Okay. Is that clear? So we'll talk about this. Now firstly, what is the permanent settlement system? देखिए, the permanent settlement system was introduced predominantly in the time of Cornwallis, and they said, देखिए, मैंने आपको बताई थी एक बात कि in Bengal there were Murshid Quli and Alivardi Khan had did what? That they had started to reform the Jagirdari system, and in this Jagirdari system they tried to do what? To reduce the number of Jagirdars, cultivate the rise of big Jagirdars. मैंने आपको एक बात बताई थी कि उन्होंने बोला कि बहुत सारे जागीरदार हैं and that is what is leading to competition. So we'll reduce the number of jagirdars and jagirdaris both. Kam jagirdar, kam jagirdari. Basically they said we'll consolidate jagirdaris. Okay. And now there were already, when the British came, there were already big jagirdars in the Bengal region. बड़ा simple सा point था कि if you will remove these big jagirdars, what will they do? They'll revolt. So don't remove these big jagirdar. Let's make these jagirdars landlords. Give them permanent legal property rights in land. वो पहले ही revenue collect करते हैं. They are already involved in revenue collection in the jagirdari system. Just give them legal property rights in land. They already are collecting revenue. जो जहाँ पे जागीरदार है उसको पट्टा दे दिया. That is, you give them a legal title that they are the owners of this. They are the owners of this land. Is that point clear? That you make them, those who were anyways collecting taxes, you give them legal ownership of the land. क्योंकि कहीं से तो आपको चालू करना पड़ेगा. This is where we'll give. In the permanent settlement system, land property rights were given to peasants or jagirdars. Jagirdars. And those jagirdars who were now given hereditary legal property rights in land are the now ones who are being termed as the zamindars. Hereditary. That is why technically हम ये कहते हैं कि landed elites were there in British times also, and the ones in the British times are called as zamindars, as they are now also being given the legal hereditary rights in land. So that is what is there, that in the permanent settlement system the land property rights go to the big jagirdars who are now the big zamindars. Now they said कि भाई देखो उनके पास सब है, they are big jagirdars, and they are now big zamindars. They have big pieces of land, they have enough money, and we are giving them a stable taxation system also. They said that under this system, don't worry jagirdars or zamindars, don't worry now. We are giving you stable taxation rate for the next, depending from different areas to different areas in Bengal, for the next 40 to 60 years, for the next 2 to 3 generations, we will not change the tax rate. If there is tax rate is 20%, it will remain the 20% for the next 3 generations or 2 generations. 40 to 60 years, the tax rate will not change. If it will not change, meaning you have a stable taxation rate. If you will produce more, you will get to keep that share. It's not that if you produce more, we will increase suddenly the tax rate from 20 to 40%. No, ऐसा नहीं है कि there's a good produce here, we will collect more tax. No, we will collect only 20%. Okay, that is what they said, even in a high produce year. So they said, हम आपको सब दे रहे हैं, stable taxation rate, legal inheritance right in property or in legal inheritance, property right in land, judicially enforceable and nobody else can take away your land. बिल्कुल कोई डरने की बात नहीं है. Produce more, keep more, and our revenue collection will also increase. This all sounded good on paper. The problem was, and the word permanent and permanent settlement comes from this, that not that they were given permanent land rights. That is what it not means. It means the revenue rates were fixed permanently. Permanently का मतलब ये नहीं है कि जब तक जहान है. Permanently का मतलब है relatively it's fixed for a period of 40 to 60 years, 2 to 3 generations. Okay. That is it. Now, the next thing that you must know here is that, okay, I am telling that all of this is being given to the landlord, but it is still not increasing productivity of agriculture. Why? Why do you think so? Because they were not investing in land. Corruption. Initial tax rates were high. There are, both these reasons are true. That one of the first things was that the Jagirdars were taking no active interest in increasing productivity, or the Zamindars now were taking no active interest in increasing productivity. But why? उन्हें तो रेवेन्यू मिल ही रहा था. They had no personal bonding with the land. See, one of the first things is, why is the Jagirdar or the Zamindar not increasing productivity is because of 2 or 3 reasons. One is that the initial tax rates, though were fixed, but they were high. It was not 10% or 20%, they were in the order of 30 to 40%. Meaning that the tax rate is already pretty high. लेकिन उसको भी समझने से पहले वो उस पॉइंट पे मैं I'll come again. But the first thing that you must understand is, the problem that occurs in the Jagirdari or the Zamindari system. See, the Zamindar, who was the erstwhile Jagirdar, उसने कभी आज तक फार्मिंग का फर भी नहीं किया. That he has no prior either experience or interest in promoting productivity. He was mainly a revenue collector. So there is firstly no interest in doing so. Secondly, they had prior no experience or interest in doing so. Secondly, there is also a caste angle to it. Jo obviously in most of the books that you will read, you will not find it. देखिए Jagirdar or Zamindar often came from the upper class, but also from the upper caste. The upper caste would never do land, would never take would do manual labor, or would never even oversee manual labor. Okay, so and most of the landless peasants were also the lower caste. Okay, so farming was a work of the lower caste. The upper caste would not do it. So there was also a reputation issue involved. And thirdly, there was also the other thing. These big Jagirdars who were called as absentee landlords. What is this absentee landlords? Yes, that basically in absentee landlordism, what used to happen was the Zamindar would sit in a urban center. Urban centers were few and far between, but the Zamindar would sit in a urban center. And a Zamindar, big Zamindars had 40 villages, 50 villages, or even some could have even more than that number of villages under them. तो उनको firstly तो यही नहीं पता होता था कि हमारी land कितनी है. यहाँ से जहाँ तक दिख रही है सब अपनी ही है. Okay? Then beyond that, So most of these were sitting in urban areas with no prior experience of agriculture or interest. So what did they do? They said, we have been revenue collectors, even if we are having legal property rights, that's fine. हमारा main काम क्या है? Revenue आना चाहिए. So they said, yes, 50 villages, हर village जाके हम थोड़ी collect करेंगे revenue. We will appoint somebody to collect revenue on our behalf. Intermediate zamindars. We will appoint intermediate zamindar. If you had, say, 50 or 60 villages, you appoint 3 intermediate zamindars. You collect from these 20 villages, you collect from these 20 villages. Intermediate zamindar said, हम क्यों करें? We'll appoint somebody else. हम भी रख लेते हैं 2-2. 10-10 villages से ये कर लेंगे. Ultimately इन्हें tax कौन दे रहा है? Peasant. Now the landlord has to give a 30 to 40% tax, somewhere in that range, to whom? To the British. Why? Because this was the land tax or the land property tax or revenue tax that they had to pay. 30 to 40% तो देना है इन्हें. So Britishers को. So there are so many. So between the landlord and between the peasant, there are intermediate landlords. इनको भी तो कुछ चाहिए होगा अपनी life awesome रखने के लिए. They are also zamindars, right? So they would also take 30-40% of the total produce anyway going to the British. बाकी they would also take some 30-40% together. बचा क्या peasant के पास? 20%, 20-30%. So almost the net effect of a number of intermediate zamindars, absentee landlords, and a zamindar taking no active interest in increasing productivity was that the cumulative burden of taxation on the peasantry was very high, not just 30% or so. Okay, cumulative, क्योंकि British भी लगा रहे हैं और ये बीच में ये लोगों का भी शेयर है. So that is very high. तो क्या बचेगा peasant के पास? कुछ नहीं. That is the. So peasant, और वैसे भी peasant के पास तो land है नहीं. Land ownership does not belong to peasant. तो peasant तो interest लेगा ही नहीं, क्योंकि मैं जो भी produce करेंगे वैसे भी ऊपर वाले ले जाने हैं. तो हमने क्या करना है ज़्यादा produce करके? Secondly, zamindar is taking no active interest, क्योंकि उनको तो आ ही रहा है पैसा. So they have no active interest. In fact, they are absentee landlords who are appointing intermediate zamindar. और तो और that apart from all of this, there is another problem. That this absentee landlordism is leading to another problem, and that is what? That and one of the reasons why landlords also never increased productivity in agriculture was because of the relatively high initial rates of tax. कि landlord को पता है कि 30-40% तो British will anyways take, और हम वैसे ही चूस ले रहे हैं जितना है, तो बचेगा क्या? वैसे भी there is not much. So even if we increase productivity, a lot of increase in productivity would be required if our real income has to increase. और उसके लिए एक बहुत बड़ी चीज करनी पड़ेगी. You will have to invest resources. You will have to do what? You will have to do irrigation. You will have to introduce new equipments. You will have to introduce new technologies, etc. वो सब करेंगे उसके कई सालों बाद. When you start doing it today, after a couple of years, it will start yielding result. क्यों इतना टेंशन लेना? लाइफ अपनी awesome है ना? So we have been erstwhile revenue collectors. Life is anyways awesome. We are getting a good share. Be happy, relax, है ना? So why to take active interest in agriculture? They did not. So productivity did not increase, but tax collection remains. लेकिन इसमें भी एक problem था. Some of these zamindars were not able to meet the revenue demands of the British. Some of these zamindars are not able to meet the revenue demands of the British. And if you are not paying the taxes to the British now had a market in land. So they would auction the lands of those who were not paying the taxes to the British. So those zamindars who did not pay the tax to the British, they were sent notices. If they still could not, through the court, an order would be obtained and their lands will be confiscated and then auctioned in the market. Any new individual could take their land. provided he is agreeing to pay the revenue on time. Okay, and land would go to whom? Who is the highest bidder? Okay, so basically auctioning of lands could be done, and those zamindars who were not paying the taxes on time, their lands could be taken away, they would be displaced, and the lands, or their lands would be sold in the market and could be bought by either other zamindars or new zamindars. Is that point clear? In the pre-British system पे भी तो हो रहा है कि if Jagirdar is not collecting revenue on time, या is not providing a revenue, then Jagirdar could be removed. तो British era में भी it can be removed, but there is a legal procedure of it. ऐसा नहीं है कि British saying I don't like your face, I'll remove you. You can remove them, but only under a legal process when there is a non-payment of tax. Is that point clear? Right? So this is the reason why it did not do what? Tax productivity, and ultimately those zamindars who did not pay the revenue on time, they were removed from their lands. Right? So first write about permanent, about the revenue settlement systems. First we are talking about so you give a new heading. You give a new heading. Types of revenue settlement systems. 1830 onwards is Mahalwari. So, types of revenue collection systems. Revenue settlement or revenue collection systems एक ही बात है. Revenue settlement or revenue collection systems. Under the British, a variety of revenue collection systems were introduced with the objective of increasing productivity, and thereby increase tax collection or revenue collection. The types of revenue collection systems were: first, permanent settlement system. आप लिखिए, अभी मैं बताता हूँ बाद में, अभी पहले एक बार लिख लीजिए पूरा. So basically in this you write, the permanent settlement system was introduced by Cornwallis. From 1790 onwards, in the Bengal region, under the system the legal property rights in land were granted to to zamindars moreover a stable taxation regime was introduced. Moreover, a stable taxation regime was introduced where the tax rates were fixed permanently for 2 to 3 generations. In bracket you can write 40 to 60 years. For 2 to 3 generations, in bracket you can write 40 to 60 years. Next para you write however under the system no major increase in productivity was noticed as the big zamindars were absentee landlords, as the big zamindars were absentee landlords who failed to take active interest take active interest in increasing productivity and appointed intermediate zamindars to collect revenue on their behalf. Increasing the cumulative burden of taxation, on peasantry. Increasing the cumulative burden of taxation on peasantry. Okay. Next para within the same. Thus, the permanent settlement system did not witness the permanent settlement system did not witness did not witness an increase in agricultural productivity. Clear? Now the next thing that we are talking about is the रायतवारी settlement. Now देखिए परमानेंट सेटलमेंट में उन्होंने बोला कि ठीक है हमने जमींदार को देख के देख लिया, प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स इन लैंड इनका तो कोई इंटरेस्ट है नहीं, लेट्स गिव द प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स टू whom who is actually the tiller, that is the peasant, and the peasant was called as the ryot. Okay, so basically the peasant was called as the ryot. Okay, and that is why they said that under the new system we will give land ownership to peasant. So that is why they called this the Rayatwari system. Okay, then they said okay we are giving land ownership to the peasant directly. So if we are giving land ownership to the peasant directly, then we will have to appoint whom? Revenue collecting officials. अभी यहाँ तो हमने जमींदार से ले लिया सीधा सीधा, but now we'll have to appoint revenue collecting officials. So they said okay, we appoint salaried revenue collecting officials who will collect the tax from individual peasants who are being given the land title. Okay, now individual peasants are being given the land title, they will regularly pay the land revenue, and they will have the legal property rights in land. Okay, now as the system was introduced, it was expected that the peasant will increase agricultural productivity, but it was noticed that there was no increase in agricultural productivity in this region also. Why? Because the officers were corrupt. सब corrupt है. They didn't have enough resources. This is the exact reason. That one of the reasons is that the peasants already had been living on or for generations together. Peasants anyways never had any surplus income. They did not have any capital at their disposal with which what could they do? With which they could actually increase the with which they could invest in increasing productivity of land. देखिए ये एक हमेशा से दास्तान रही है. A small farmer may not have enough capital to invest in terms of buying new equipments or technologies which need to be invested to increase productivity, and that is why small farmers, small peasants with little capital, surplus income or capital, fail to take active steps to increase productivity. आप बोलेंगे कि सर ये लोन भी तो ले सकते हैं. Small farmer can take loan. Farmers could take loans, but money lenders would give loan at exorbitant interest rate. So that is what also was a problem. देखिए ऐसा अभी भी है. आप बैंक से जाइए लोन लेने, आपको मिलेगा 12% पे, 13% पे हाउस लोन ये वो. If you are a big corporate, you can get a loan at a much lower interest rate. देखिए बड़ी सिंपल. फार्मर को 60,000 रुपए का लोन चाहिए तो वो बैंक के चक्कर काटेगा, मुद्रा ये वो दुनिया भर के, ठीक है, और एंड विल गेट इट एट अ इंटरेस्ट रेट. चलो सरकार हैज सब्सिडाइज द इंटरेस्ट रेट, इट विल गेट इट एट 5%. सरकार विल पे 2-3%, फार्मर विल पे 5%, हो गया. बट यू वांट आईफोन, 0% इंटरेस्ट रेट. जीवन में कुछ हो ना हो आईफोन हो, है ना. So that is there. So it is in this context that it was not easy for the peasant. He had to deal with a high interest rate if he was to take loans. If he was not to take loans, he did not have surplus capital to invest to increase productivity. On top of that, in the permanent settlement system, the revenue rates were fixed for a longer duration, 40 to 60 years. Here the revenue rates were not fixed or were relatively less stable. For a lesser duration, they would change every 10 or 15 years. So one did not know कि अच्छा सब लोन वोन लेके करा भी धीमे 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 और फिर रेट बढ़ा दिया, right? So here the tax rates were relatively less stable. The land property rights were given to the peasantry, but the peasantry lacked surplus capital, and the rates were also relatively fixed for lesser duration of time. And on top of that, if here the average rates were 30 to 40%, here it was more than 30 to 40%. तो सेम वही हो गया, अल्टीमेटली सेम तो वही होना ही है, because the end objective is to increase tax collection, but they want to peasant to do increase productivity in one way or the other without the state investing in increasing productivity. Neither in the permanent settlement system nor in the Rayatwari settlement system, the British state or the British government is not investing. It is leaving it to the individual, either individual landowner, either the big landowner or the small landowner. When India got the green revolution in the 1960s, it was not the big or the small landowner, it was the government. It had to take the initiative. By how? By providing cheap loans, by providing cheap technologies, and by subsidizing a lot of these introduction of these technologies. Then only farmers could introduce these technologies and increase productivity to increase food production in the country. So that is why one of the basic things is, if you want to increase the productivity of agriculture, the state has to take an active interest. That was neither taken during the Mughal era, that is neither taken during the British era. So that is why peasant revolts continued during the Mughal era, they continued during the British era, they have continued even today. आज के रीजन भी कुछ कुछ पुराने जैसे हैं और कुछ कुछ नए हैं. Okay, that is another matter. Okay, but that is something that we'll discuss बाद में कभी, because अभी हम peasant revolts आगे भी पढ़ेंगे as a separate topic. I'll just give you 1 minute. I'll give you time to ask questions. So this is something which is happening here about the Rayatwari system. ये सारे points आपको याद रखना है. Who introduced and what are the characteristics? That ऐसा आपको statement ऐसा आएगा that with respect to prelims में ऐसे question आता है इससे, that they can give you a question with respect to revenue settlement systems in British India, which of the following statements are true? That the permanent settlement system, the land ownership rights were given to the zamindars. That is true statement, right? They'll give another statement with respect to the Rayatwari system, the revenue rates were fixed permanently, right? ऐसे 2-3 statements they will give, and they'll ask you to pick up which of the following are true, 1, 2, 1 to 3, etc. That is the kind of factual question they will ask. In the mains क्या पूछेंगे जो हमने अभी पहले लिखा about nature. Okay, so from the same issue they can ask different things in prelims and different thing in mains. और mains में जब वो facts पूछेंगे तो name भी पूछ सकते हैं partly इसमें और उसके characteristics, और वहाँ पे impact, all of that and causes पूछ सकते. Any doubts still here? Okay, one of the, in this region, what is asking is ki sir, if in these regions you are giving land rights to peasants, won't the zamindars revolt? In this region there were zamindars, but they were not very big zamindars. Okay, in fact relatively the land distribution pattern in southern India was, if you remember, anyways, if you remember, I told you that a large part of this region was under Khalisa system previously. So वहाँ पे कोई बहुत बड़े बड़े जमींदार historically थे ही नहीं. That could pose big trouble for the British. Okay, so if you remember, Mysore region anyways is getting what? Salaried revenue collecting officials, right? So इस region में जो land distribution pattern था, that was relatively more equal. Now one more thing also to know is that when zamindars could not pay the taxes, they were displaced here. Often peasants also, if could not pay the taxes because of a low produce in a particular year or because of high burden of taxes, even the peasants were displaced from their land. Their land was taken away and auctioned in the market to anybody who was willing to buy them. So just like the permanent settlement system displays a number of zamindars, the Rayatwari settlement system displays a number of peasants. Okay. So that is why the difference in to compared to pre-British India is that in the pre-British India, peasants do not have legal property rights in land. Peasants do not, nobody has legal property rights. So, but peasants had customary rights in land. Peasants were not displaced from their lands. अब लो प्रोड्यूस है तो कोई बात नहीं, कम टैक्स दे दो, अगले साल ज्यादा दे देना. Anyways, land is not a commodity. Peasant को हटा भी दिया तो कोई और peasant ही आएगा वहाँ. Land anyways belongs to the king. So land is not going to be sold anyways. So in the pre-British India, land is not a commodity. It can't be bought and sold in the market. So there is no point of displacing the peasant. Let the peasant be. आप displace करेंगे तो peasants would revolt anyways. So let the peasant be. In the pre-British India, that was the case. And so we say that the displacement of the peasantry worsened in British India as compared to pre-British India. So अब जब peasant की land भी जा रही है, उसको high burden of taxation भी देना है, तो peasant क्या करेगा? Peasant आएगा सड़क पे, peasant will revolt, and peasants revolted many a number of times in British India. We'll talk about peasant revolts separately. Is that point clear? The past 4 years in India has seen one of the lowest agricultural growth rates in the country in the past 30 years. And that is why also there have been a number of peasant marches. Right? You saw that in Maharashtra a couple of months ago. Right? So obviously if there are low agricultural growth rates and there is unemployment, etc., or low agricultural growth rates mean low farm income. A country in which 49 to 50% are still dependent on agriculture for their livelihood, low agricultural growth rate, low farmer incomes would mean rural agrarian distress, and rural agrarian distress would lead to revolts. As simple as that. Right? And often in these revolts they would demand certain things. वो demand क्या है, उसके लिए तो आपको फिर अलग पूरा वो पढ़ना पड़ेगा. But just as a context, right? Now, the next thing that we are talking about, firstly write this much, then we'll talk the next one. So we've written permanent settlement. Revolt का मतलब, riot का मतलब, riot was the term that was used for the peasant. मतलब,
it's basically riot means janta.
अच्छा, rai, I have no clue. As she's saying, maybe it's a regional term. It's a regional term. It's a regional term. So that is there. अंग्रेजी का नहीं है. हाँ, तो ये अंग्रेजी का नहीं है. अंग्रेजी का होता तो मुझे पता होता. हाँ, तो आप लिखिए ना, कोई नहीं पूछ. So that is there. So in that context, you can write Rayatwari settlement system. Under the Rayatwari settlement system was introduced 1820s onwards. The Rayatwari settlement system was introduced 1820s onwards under Munro, Thomas Munro, and Reed. Under the system, pardon? The Rayatwari settlement system was introduced 1820s onwards under Thomas Munro and William Reed or Reed. Under the system, the legal property rights in land were granted to peasants or riot were granted to the peasant or riot from whom revenue collection would be done from whom revenue collection would be done directly through salaried revenue collecting officials, through salaried revenue collecting officials. Next para. However, the system failed to increase. However, the system failed to increase agricultural productivity as the peasants had to deal with high burden of taxation or high tax rates, one and the same thing, and lacked lacked access to capital required for investments for productivity increase. Moreover, inability to pay land revenue on time often resulted in the forced displacement of peasantry and recurrent peasant revolts Clear? हाँ हाँ peasant revolt armed उस टाइम पे most not all peasant revolts were armed. In fact, we argue that some of the peasant revolts were armed, okay, but at the many a times fully aware of the British response to such revolts, a number of revolts, actually we'll discuss later, started taking a more legal route also, filing cases in the courts, etc. So we'll talk about that later. अभी रुक जाइए, अभी peasant revolt separately हम बात करेंगे पूरी अलग से. विल डिस्कस अ पीजेंट रिवोल्ट एज अ टॉपिक. हाँ नहीं, मैंने पहले भी बोला दे आर नॉट रिप्लेसिंग, दे आर ट्राइड इन डिफरेंट रीजन्स. ओके, ऐसा क्योंकि आप डिस्प्लेस करेंगे यहाँ से जमींदार को तो फिर रिवोल्ट होगा. ओके, दैट इज दैट. दे आर नॉट डिस्प्लेसिंग, दे आर ट्राइंग. देखिए, हर किसी गवर्नर जनरल का अपना एक मोटिव था हर गवर्नर जनरल वांटेड टू शो कि मेरा वाला बेटर है, पर किसी का बेटर नहीं था. They're experimenting also, but they all want to demonstrate that we are better administrators, we will increase revenue collection. Increasing revenue collection is the end objective. For that, increasing productivity is the intermediate objective. लेकिन वो intermediate ही नहीं हो रहा, तो end objective को achieve कर पाना is a bit more difficult. That is the हाँ.
Final step towards centralization. So it was only centralized. So you said the regional governors were trying to.
I did not say regional governors. I said governor generals. अभी रुक जाइए, चार्टर एक्ट पे भी आएंगे, सब आएंगे. फिर हम बंगाल व सबऑर्डिनेट, अदर रीजन्स व सबऑर्डिनेटेड टू बंगाल. हाँ, कोई इशू नहीं है. नॉट बैड, इट्स ओके. आई एम ट्राइंग टू से कि अभी रुकिए, अभी बहुत सारी चीजें, पीजेंट रिवोल्ट आएगा, चार्टर एक्ट्स आएंगे, सब आएंगे, लेकिन अभी हम इकोनॉमिक्स डिस्कस करें. एक बार ये समझते हैं, फिर जब वो वहां पे आ जाएंगे, वहां पे अब मैं बता दूंगा आपको सब. कोई इशू नहीं है, सवाल पूछने में कोई दिक्कत, खूब पूछे. डेमोक्रेसी क्लास के अंदर है. नो इश्यूज. सो नेक्स्ट थिंग, एनी अदर डाउट्स? हाँ, थॉमस मुनरो एंड हेक्टर मुनरो. I have no idea of Hector Munro. I'll see, I'll let you know. Anything else? हाँ, ब्रिटेन में लैंडलॉर्ड सिस्टम कैसे सक्सेसफुल हुआ और यहाँ हमारे यहाँ क्यों नहीं हो सका? Why was, if that's a valid question, कि sir, if this is inspired from the British landlordism system, then if it has worked in Britain, why has it not worked in India? Why? Because in Britain there were two things. One, in Britain there were two things. One, what was available in Britain at this point of time was that the landlords took active interest in increasing productivity. Why? Because those who were the landlords had already been, those who were made the landlords were not the ones who had not taken any active interest, who had previously also not taken any active interest or had no attachment to land. Those who were made the landlords in British system were the ones who already had who were cultivators themselves and who also hired additional labor. It's not that they appointed somebody as a landlord who had no prior attachment to land. That is there. हाँ. Serfdom भी उसका एक reason है. उसका एक reason ये भी है that they had serfdom and we did not have serfdom. अब फिर सवाल आ जाएगा कि सर serfdom और इसमें क्या है? तो देखिए सर्वडम में क्या था ये भी बता ही देता हूँ, आप पूछ रहे तो. मैं उस रास्ते पे जा नहीं रहा था, लेकिन आप ले गए. तो देखिए, देयर इज सर्फ एंड देयर इज द लैंडलॉर्ड. पहली बात, अब पहले की सर ये फ्यूडलिज्म होता ही क्या है? in feudal system many people do not understand the difference. In feudalism or feudalism has serfdom, okay? And in serfdom there is a landlord and there is a serf. Landlord is the one who owns a piece of land and the peasant is tied to this piece of land. Matlab peasant will cultivate this piece of land, okay, and landlord will own the piece of land. Suppose whatever is the produce, a major portion of the produce is going to be taken, not a major, almost all the produce will be taken by the landlord. The serf will be left only with enough for their survival, okay, and the serf will be left only with enough for their survival, and most of the produce will be taken by the landlord, okay. And basically, but the serf was not a free individual. Serfdom and slavery are not exactly the same things. There is a difference also. But अभी अब फिर वहाँ से एक दूसरा सवाल ये आएगा कि सर स्लेवरी और सर्फडम में क्या डिफरेंस है, वो भी मैं यहीं बता दूँ, सब बता दूँ. Serfdom basically means that the cultivator is peasant is not free. Peasant ऐसा नहीं है कि नहीं, I don't want to be the serf, I will go somewhere else to Himalayas. You can't do that. You have to cultivate the same piece of land. If landlord A sold the land to landlord B, then peasants will not be displaced, or the serfs, as they were called here, will not be displaced. They will continue the same, cultivate the same piece of land, even if A is selling the land to B. Okay. So has the peasant any fear of being displaced? No. And the landlord also takes active interest. The landlord will ensure that the serfs keep working. And the serfs also are at least have this degree of assurance that they will not be displaced. But this is a flip side to this is also there, that the serfs could not leave agriculture and go somewhere else. Okay. So some could say that serfdom is a form of slavery only, that you can't leave a job and do something that you want to do. You are tied to it. But there is a difference. Is in slavery, what happens is that an individual is, a slave is himself a property. A slave is himself a property. He can be bought and sold in the market, but you can't buy a serf. It's not something that you can buy or sell in the, you can't buy a serf or sell him in the market. But in slavery, you can buy an individual and buy and sell him in the market. Serfdom is also hereditary. Slavery is also hereditary. Both of them are hereditary. मतलब आप slave के बच्चे हैं तो आप slave ही पैदा होंगे. आप serf हैं तो आप serf. If you're born in a serf family, you will be a serf. So वो है, that is there. There is similarity also, but there is a crucial difference also. Is that point clear? ठीक है, सब समझ गए? और any कोई doubt? So that is there. Now just last thing about Mehelwari. Mehelwari का कोई detail important नहीं है. Only this much is important for you to know, that in the Mehelwari system was introduced in Northwest. Why it was introduced in Northwest? Because in these areas, पहली बात सबको देख लिया, देखे सब निकम्मे हैं. Nobody is increasing productivity. So चाहे किसी को दो चाहे किसी को दो, productivity तो increase होनी नहीं है. So उन्होंने बोला फालतू में headache लेना ही नहीं है. We will collect revenue at the level of villages. We will collect revenue at the level of villages from the village headmen. In the areas where the punch system or the khap system was already in place, or where local governance systems were already in place, why should we give all these land revenue rights, ye wo, all of that, and legal property rights, etc. Faltu, no need to try and introduce all such complexity. Just we will collect the revenue, we will tell the revenue demand for the month or for the year to the village headman. The village headman can collect the revenue from the village and give it to us. That's it. That is what it was done. So आपकी books में ये लिखा रहता है that under the Mehelwari system, revenue settlement was done at the level of villages. That is it. Here revenue settlement is being done at the level of zamindars. Here it is being done at the level of peasants. Here it would be done at the level of villages. Okay. अब इसका detail मुझे भी नहीं पता कि अब if you are going to ask me कि sir exactly village में से कौन collect करता था, the village headman's responsibility is to ensure that revenue is collected. Often villages have deep divisions, or there were caste based hierarchies in the village system, etc. They would also affect revenue collection. That was there. Okay, and आपके level पे महलवारी में ज़्यादा जाने का ज़रूरत नहीं है. That is more than enough. And but again, even here there is no major attempt also. There is no major increase in productivity. Why? Because even here the state is not taking much responsibility. The only place in British India where there was increase in productivity was by the 1900s, where the British had finally set up some irrigation networks in India's northwest. Okay, and a large part of this irrigation network is there in Pakistan. So after the partition, a lot of that irrigated region went to Pakistan, and only a limited part was left in India. So that is there. And that is why even when Green Revolution was introduced, it benefited some regions more than the other. Okay, because high yielding varieties of wheat and rice were introduced, which also required more water, which was available only in better irrigated regions, which were there either in northwest or to some extent in the east or south, very limited. Okay, but predominantly northwest. That is there. Clear? So just write down about the Mahalwari system 2 lines. The Mahalwari system was introduced by William Bentnick from 1830s onwards. From 1830 onwards in the northwest region where the revenue settlement was done at the village level. Now the next देखिए अल्टीमेटली यही एंड ऑब्जेक्टिव है टैक्स कलेक्शन इंक्रीज करना, उसके लिए आपका इंटरमीडिएट ऑब्जेक्टिव है प्रोडक्टिविटी इंक्रीज करना, दैट इज इट। वो हर जगह है, क्योंकि और क्या तरीका है, ये तो हमने पहले ही कितनी बार बात कर ली कि टैक्स कलेक्शन आपने इंक्रीज कैसे करेंगे, और या तो रेट बढ़ाएंगे या प्रोडक्टिविटी बढ़ाएंगे या दोनों बढ़ाएंगे। रेट बढ़ाएंगे तो रिवोल्ट होगा, हर जगह यही ऑब्जेक्टिव है, इसीलिए मैंने शुरू में लगवाया that when you are writing we wrote that in all the objective of all settlement systems is ultimately to increase revenue collection and increase productivity, क्योंकि that is the way, that is there। मैं बोल रहा हूं कि आप और कौन से आप रेवेन्यू कलेक्शन को इंक्रीज करने का कोई तो इट इज देयर। एफर्ट नहीं, एफर्ट कहीं नहीं लगा, एफर्ट तो कहीं नहीं लगाया। इन टर्म्स ऑफ स्टेट इन्वेस्टमेंट्स टू इंक्रीज प्रोडक्टिविटी देयर इज नो स्टेट इन्वेस्टमेंट बीइंग मेड हियर नाउ। हाँ देखिए अभी एक चीज, पहली बात, अभी आप जब इसको और जाके खोदेंगे, जब महलवारी सिस्टम को आप और जाके ढूंढेंगे, सो महलवारी सिस्टम इज नॉट, आप कई जगह देखेंगे कि इट इज रिटन बाय बेंटनिक and कई जगह पे देखेंगे it is not, it was introduced by others, though it was institutionalized by Bentnick, that it was under the governor generalship of Bentnick who comes in 1829 that this system is formally applied to the whole region, so that is there, and that is the reason it is said कि भाई किसके अंडर, you want to talk about who was the governor then or who was the governor general then। हम क्या कर रहे हैं, गवर्नर जनरल्स के नाम लिख रहे हैं, तो इसीलिए हमने 1829 में गवर्नर जनरल वाज वॉरेन हेस्टिंग्स द गवर्नर जनरल इन 1829 1830 इन इंडिया नहीं। तो हम अब अगर आप ये देखेंगे किस किस, ये तो वही बात हुई कि इंडिया में जो हो रहा है वो उस टाइम पे कौन प्राइम मिनिस्टर था, कौन चीफ मिनिस्टर था। आप बोल सकते हैं कि सर मैं तो चीफ मिनिस्टर की बात कर रहा था, मैं बोल रहा हूं कि मैं तो प्राइम मिनिस्टर की बात कर रहा हूं। तो हम गवर्नर जनरल्स के नाम लिख रहे हैं, इसलिए हमने गवर्नर जनरल्स का नाम लिखा है। इसी पे जाएगा, जब अभी तक पूछे हैं वो गवर्नर जनरल्स के ही नाम पूछे, अब जब वो खत्म हो जाए उनके जीवन में और भी कुछ नहीं रह गया पूछने के लिए, हो सकता है ये भी पूछने लगे। सो दैट इज देयर। नाउ द नेक्स्ट थिंग टू टॉक अबाउट इज द इम्पैक्ट। फर्स्टली देखिए, एक तो है जो मैं बार बार आपको बता रहा हूं, हाई बर्डन ऑफ टैक्सेशन would lead to peasant revolts. Also, these peasant revolts are getting triggered primarily because of what? Because of the displacement of peasantry. Right? Peasants are being displaced from their land for non-payment of taxes. So, this is what is called as alienation of peasant from their land. Alien मतलब गैर हो गए कोई और, राइट। सो एलियनेशन ऑफ पीजेंट फ्रॉम देयर लैंड इज लीडिंग टू और alienation of peasant of their land, ये fancy तरीका हो गया ये कहने का कि this is displacement of peasantry which is leading to peasant revolts. But it is not just peasants who are getting displaced. In many a number of areas, zamindars are also getting displaced, the old zamindari class. Then the British introduced the whole new property right system. उसका एक impact is also what there? The commodification of land, right? Commodification of land is also a, आप बोल सकते हैं कि sir they introduce commodification of land, it is not the impact, but it is, you can at one level say it is impact also, कि it is making land a commodity. जो उन्होंने new system introduce किया, that is making land a commodity which can be bought and sold in the market, which was not the case before. Then what you also see is that apart from peasant reports, displacement of peasantry and old zamindari class, commodification of lands, you also see a worsening of crisis in agrarian India. Why is there a worsening of crisis in agrarian India as compared to whom? Pre-British India. क्योंकि pre-British India, at least if the peasant could not pay tax on time, he was not displaced, right? For whatever the ills in the pre-British system, even though there were no legal property rights in land, there were customary rights. Peasants could continue occupying the same piece of land. However, here now what is happening, that there is more chances of displacement. There is no increase in productivity, more chances of displacement. So their position as compared to pre-British India is actually getting worse. Right? That is clear. Right? So all of these are the impacts. जब हम revolt of 1857 की बात करेंगे, तो we will say what were the economic causes of revolts. Part of the economic cause of the revolt is the reason that zamindars are unhappy, that peasantry is unhappy, and unhappy people are looking for a leadership also which is unhappy, and that comes from whom? The princely states. Zamindars and princely states gave leadership in the revolt of 1857. Why princely states, all of that comes, we will discuss later. But ये मैं इसलिए बता रहा हूँ कि मैं वहाँ पे बोलूँगा कि the economic causes are the same that we have discussed before. And these are the impact of all of the British land revenue policy becomes a economic cause for the revolt of 1857 also. Clear? And we'll discuss revolt in much detail, but मैं आपको अभी से बता दे रहा हूँ ताकि later when we establish the link you will know कि this is what we are referring to. So you can write down. The land revenue system introduced under British. The land revenue system introduced under British rule often led to, this is impact that we are writing, right? Often led to recurrent peasant revolts, often led to recurrent peasant revolts dealing with the high burden of taxation, moreover, the displacement of the peasantry, or moreover the displacement of the peasantry and the old zamindari class was common next point you write, the commodification of land, the commodification of land introduced capitalist relations in land ownership patterns. Capitalist relations in land ownership patterns. With the focus on individual ownership, the focus on individual ownership of land, with the focus on individual ownership of land, right? Capitalism में यही है, individual ownership of property. That is why we say these are the capitalist relations in land were introduced by the British. State is not owning the property, individual is owning the property in land. Okay, that is what we are saying. Thus, as the British introduced a new revenue collection system, with a high burden of tax, and failed to take any active steps to increase the productivity of agriculture, often leading to displacements the position of the Indian peasantry worsened during the British rule. The position of the Indian peasantry worsened during the British rule. Clear? Now the next topic that we are talking about is the role of railways. ये तो बहुत ही easy है. Okay, इसमें कुछ भी नहीं है. That देखिए दुनिया भर में रेलवेज का जन्म इसलिए नहीं हुआ था कि आप यहाँ से राजधानी लें और मुंबई जाएं, पटना जाएं या पुणे जाएं, जहाँ भी जाना चाहते नहीं. It was born primarily for the rapid movement of goods, both finished goods and raw materials. The first country in the world to get railways was unsurprisingly the first country to go through industrial revolution, and that is Britain. And as industrial revolution spread to different areas, railways also expanded its networks, not just in Britain, India, Japan, jahan industrial revolution hua, railways was required for a cheap fast, cheap and a fast movement of goods, both raw materials as well as finished goods. The first railway networks were constructed in India from Bombay to Thane, etc., and all of that from 1850s onwards, from major ports to the interior of the country. Okay? And this would allow them what? That the British goods would land at the ports, and from the ports these goods could be quickly transported to the interior parts of the country, and it would lower the cost of transportation also. देखिए आपके syllabus में एक चीज है, railways, waterways, और बताइए कोई और वे रह गया हो? ये सब आपके सिलेबस में लिखा हुआ है सेपरेटली, पेपर 3, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर और उसमें है ना. तो इन सबके इश्यूज एंड चैलेंजेस आपको पता होने चाहिए, एग्जाम्स में आते हैं बार बार. ये आपको शायद ज्योग्राफी में भी पढ़ाया जाएगा, ज्योग्राफी में ना भी पढ़ाया जाए तो इकोनॉमी में तो है ही है ना. दैट यू ऑल गेट दीज काइंड ऑफ क्वेश्चंस. हर साल पहले आता था एक रेलवे बजट, अब नहीं आता, लेकिन अल्टीमेटली इश्यूज एंड चैलेंजेस इन रेलवेज, इस पे क्वेश्चन पहले भी आया हुआ है मेंस एग्जाम में. लेकिन आज अभी आप उड़ान राइट, रोड सेफ्टी, रेलवेज, फ्राइट, टैरिफ, इश्यूज, चैलेंजेस, ये सब पूछा जाता है ना. तो ये वहां भी है, लेकिन हम बस इसकी बात कर रहे हैं, वो भी बहुत थोड़ी सी अभी के लिए. So the first railways, and why is railways considered a part of infrastructure? Because just like you need roads to move goods, you need railways also to move goods. And the railways was a way of not just moving goods from ports to the interior part of the country, but also bringing raw materials from the interior to the ports and transfer it to the British. Okay, so that is why the first port lines, the first railway lines were built in this fashion. Okay, then, so why am I telling you this? They can ask you a question like this, that to what extent the construction of railways represented a positive legacy of British rule in India. Okay, a number of some amount of Cambridge historians argue, those historians who are more sympathetic towards the British viewpoint, they argue that, you know, it was not that all was evil in British rule. When the British left India, they left a railway network of roughly even 45,000 kilometers of railways in India, making the Indian railway network one of the biggest in the world. So ऐसा नहीं है the British have only exploited India, they have also left a positive legacy of their rule, and that is one of that is the such a big railway network. उन्होंने स्कूल बनाए, रेलवेज बनाया, education system बनाया, university बनाई. There's so much positive legacy left by the British, is what is argued by some. Then we have Shashi Tharoor. Okay. So that is there. Now, but Shashi Tharoor is only telling you what is written in your NCERT. Indians find that very amazing because of two things. Shashi Tharoor is a good looking guy. Secondly, he speaks chastity English. है ना? तो माहौल पूरा सही रहता है, अंग्रेजी तेज बोलो, दिखने में अच्छे हो, इसके पीछे कुछ चल रहा है. So now basically what is happening here is that when you look at, so why, that is why they can ask you a question like this, because this has always often been in a debate. Now firstly we say that no, in a net conclusion we will say that the railways does not represent a positive legacy left by the British. Most जगहों पे हम ये कहते हैं कि नहीं पॉजिटिव भी है, नेगेटिव भी है, यहाँ पे हम ये कहेंगे कि कोई पॉजिटिव नहीं है, सब नेगेटिव है. Okay, why? Because I'll just explain. So why do we say so? Is because firstly, the British say that it was an expensive structure built to begin with a cost of 150 crore. Okay, to begin with a cost of 150 crore rupees then. Okay, so it was, if you see in today's term, it was a significant amount of investment to begin with, and the cost, and this was a heavy cost. Okay, now the a number of those who argue that it was a positive legacy of the British rule, they say that this cost was borne by the British. Okay, but then the point remains that actually the British Indian government was given a loan of 150 to 200 crores to begin with. But loan was given by whom? The British capitalist class. देखिए, British capitalist class wanted a better control of the Indian market, तो उन्होंने बोला कि railways तो बनाना पड़ेगा, है ना? So they were the ones who were willing to give a loan, but it was a big loan. Okay, and the British capitalist class is giving a big loan not just because they want, the construction of railways, but also because of another purpose, and that will become clear in a minute. That देखिए, जब आप गरीब होते हैं, जब आप when you are गरीब, तो you are looking for a wage, जाएं काम करें पैसा आए. When you are rich, you are owning industries, others come and work for you. When you are truly rich, then you don't need to own industries, etc. You own industries, it's okay. Money will make more money. ब्याज पे पैसा देना, है ना? So the British capitalist class had started emerging from 1750s onwards. After a century of operation by 1850s, they had accumulated huge profits. That money was lying in banks, and banks do not give big interest rate. Okay, banks were not giving very high interest rate. तो आप अपना पैसा लेके जाइए बैंक में आज, तो आपको SBI में लेके जाइए स्पेशली, so आपको मिलेगा 6.5% इंटरेस्ट रेट. अब FD में रखेंगे तो, है ना, उसमें 30% तो आप टैक्स देंगे, तो वो बचेगा 3%, और इन्फ्लेशन है 10% या 8% या 7%. सो नेट आपकी हर साल इनकम कम हो रही है, जो भी आपका रखा है उसकी वैल्यू कम हो रही है अगर आपने उसको बैंक में रखा हुआ है ना. सो बेसिकली द कैपिटलिस्ट क्लास वाज नॉट, इट हैड अ लार्ज अमाउंट ऑफ सरप्लस वेल्थ. वो बैंक में रखा उसको लो इंटरेस्ट रेट मिल रहा है. सो at this point of time the British agreed, the British capitalist class gave a loan to the British Indian government of 150 crores or so, when at an interest rate of 5%, when the prevailing interest rate at the world was 3%. Matlab, if they would have kept it in banks, they would have got a 3% interest rate. They would have lended it to any other government. They would have also, maximum international lending rates were at a range of 3%. But Indian government is offering 5%, like Kotak Mahindra. 4 nahi 6. So basically, the Indian government was offering a higher and an attractive interest rate, which made the British capitalist class see this not as merely a way to expand the railway network, but also as a good investment option. Because this is a loan. Anyways, the Indian government will pay back the loan, and that too with a good interest rate. And they are assured that Indian government will pay back the loan. They will not behave like whom? They will not behave like so many people. We have Mehul Choksi, Nirav Modi, Vijay Mallya. They will not behave like them. They will pay back the loans. How? How will they pay back the loans? How is that ensured? Because of the B here. The British government. They are rest assured that the Indian government will pay back the loan because it is under the British control. It is only in 1850s when it is very clear that the British are already in direct control and the British government is in control. That is when they are ready to give the loan. आप कभी भी लोन उसको नहीं देंगे अगर आपको लोन वापस चाहिए जिसकी क्रेडिबिलिटी पे आपको शक हो. तभी तो बैंक आपसे बोलता है दैट यू वांट 30 लाख का लोन तो इतने सारे पेपर लेके आओ. कब पैदा हुए, कहाँ रहते हो, कहाँ नौकरी करते हो, 3 साल की इनकम टैक्स रिटर्न, सब कुछ. विजय माल्या got the loan by the name of logo of Kingfisher only. That is the guarantee. Kingfisher also is the king of his good times. He left India on being a willful defaulter, whatever. Right? So, that is there. Now, this happens. So, firstly, it is not that the British have done us a favor. The British government did not, the British capitalist class did not do a favor by giving that loan. It was a good investment option for them. Secondly, the British Indian government repaid all the loan with what? By using the taxpayers' money. That is the Indian agrarian class and other sectors of the Indian economy. So, this loan was paid. So, it's not that the British actually built at some cost to themselves. The Indians ultimately financed the construction of the railways in India. That's not all. Also, the construction of the railways was done in a manner that it favored British economic interest. From the ports to the interior and that. अब आप बोलेंगे सर ऐसा थोड़ी कि only British can use, right? Only it is not that those only British manufacturers can use the railways. Indian manufacturers could also use the railways, so it is benefiting Indian manufacturers also, that they could move the goods from one region to another using the railways. But इसका भी इंतजाम था. So, the British introduced what was the inverted tariff structure. Okay, that under this inverted tariff structure, if you had to move the good from B to C, even if they were close, suppose moving goods from B to C would cause, even if it was 100 kilometers per hour, 100 kilometers apart, the cost could be say 1 rupee per kilometer. The tariff could be say 1 rupee per kilometer. So that is there for moving goods. But even if A and B were far apart, then the tariff could be say 0.2 rupees per kilometer. Matlab, it could be cheaper to move goods to and fro ports rather than moving the goods from one interior point to another. To incentivize the use of railways to move goods to and from ports, not from one interior point to another. That is what most Indian producers could use it. So that is what is there. Okay, so जैसे एक बड़ा सिंपल सा चीज़ है, आज भी होता है in railways, telescopic faring. Basically is कि if you buy a ticket, then the per kilometer tariff decreases if you buy it for a long range. अगर आप यहाँ से आगरा तक का टिकट लेंगे, so per kilometer tariff will be higher than you take from here to Pune or to Bhopal. Okay, because the government wants that the railways must be used for long distance travel primarily. Okay, that is there. So they had an inverted tariff structure of the railways also to incentivize its use for whom? For moving goods to and from ports. Thirdly, it was meant the railways was constructed not just to serve the economic interests of British, but also their political interests also. And that is moving of army. Yes. The railways were often constructed in and around cantonment areas so that they could quickly move railways, they could quickly move the army using the railways from one area to another, to suppress any revolts in any region which may break out from time to time. So even the construction of railways, which allowed a quick mobilization of troops, tightened allowed the British to tighten their imperial control over the region. Okay. So the construction of the railways, the cost for which was borne by Indians, ultimately served the economic interest of British rule in India and the political interest of British rule in India. Though they left behind 45,000 kilometers of railways in India, it was merely a byproduct. It was merely a byproduct. While the chief aims neither where it only worsened the exploitation of Indians, and the cost for it was also borne by Indians. That is there. Is that point clear? So any doubts still there? You can write. Railways, railways and its impact on British India. The construction of railways started in India from 1853 onwards or 1850s onwards, कुछ भी लिख सकते हैं, 1853 onwards. The construction of railways started in India from 1853 onwards. Primarily to Dalhousie is the Governor General at this time. So, the construction of railways were introduced in India from 1853 onwards, primarily to serve the imperial political and economic objectives in the region. In this you write, under this, next para you write, the initial cost of construction of railways amounting to 150 crores. ₹150 crore, amounting to 150 crores was extended as a loan to the British Indian government, was extended by the British Indian government by the British capitalist class at an attractive interest rate of 5% even when the prevailing international rates hovered around 3.3 to 3.5%. Hovered around 3 to 3.5%. Thus, the cost for construction of railways was borne by the Indian government, the British Indian government or the Indian government which offered favorable terms to the British capitalist class. देखिए, China is giving infrastructure loans to a number of countries under the One Belt One Road initiative, and in these Chinese loans, a number of these loans are also at high interest rates. Often China, for example, China is giving loans to small countries with some of them with relatively weak economies for big infrastructure projects at high interest rates, and some of these countries may not be able to repay the loans, may not be in a position to repay the loans. Then these countries may default. If these countries may default, then China may renegotiate such loans with other terms, etc. And this can have implications. तो important सा point ये नहीं है कि आपको आईफोन खरीदने के लिए लोन मिल रहा है, but at what interest rate मिल रहा है, ये भी उतना ही important है, क्योंकि at zero down payment भी आपको अगर आईफोन मिल रहा है, ultimately आपको उसका पैसा देना है ना, at 5,000 rupees per month for the next 18 months अगर आपको आईफोन मिल रहा है, so you must also see कि वो 60,000 का था, वो मिल आपको 90,000 में रहा है ना, तो ऐसे नहीं लेना, देख के लीजिए. So don't just look at that only at this per month, also look what is the interest rate you have to pay. So that is there. Now the next thing, that we have to focus upon is okay, so write the next para. Moreover, the railways aimed to enable a quick movement of goods to and fro from the ports to the interior of the country, to and fro from the ports to the interior of the country, to and fro from the ports to the interior of the country, allowing the British goods, allowing the British finished goods to capture a bigger market and procure raw materials at lower costs. Next para. Railways also enabled a quick mobilization of troops. The railways also enabled a quick mobilization of troops, allowing rapid troop deployment to suppress revolts, allowing rapid troop deployment to suppress revolts, and thus tighten their political control. Thus tighten their political control. And thus tighten their political control. Lastly, the inverted tariff structure. The inverted tariff structure of railways discouraged its use by Indian traders. Conclusion you can write. Thus, the construction of railways did not represent a positive legacy. Thus, the construction of railways did not represent a positive legacy of British rule, rather was symbolic rather was symbolic of the exploitative policies adopted by British rulers and capitalist class towards India. देखिए, all said and done about Shashi Tharoor, at least पढ़ा लिखा है वो. Does not mean that you have to be English educated, gone to hi-fi Western universities only to be educated. You had Akbar also, who was illiterate but was educated, and you have literate people also who are uneducated. You had Rabindranath Tagore also, who never completed formal schooling also, क्योंकि हो नहीं पा रहा था उनसे. But he still went on to become a philosopher come poet and win a Nobel Prize. What? Not Nobel Prize? And win a Nobel Prize only, literature. Now, what? Okay, see, when British, so that is what we are saying, ki British capitalist class, you are asking what foreign, when foreigners are coming and investing in India, what are the Indians doing, right? Indian, zamindari class, etc. Abhi when we talk about, this is what we are going to talk, the next topic is what? The role of British investments and industrialization policy. Okay, that is happening. So basically the next heading that we are talking about is the role of British investments and the industrialization policy under British rule. To understand this, basically what you need to understand is that when we talk about British investments or industrialization policy under British rule, what you need to focus upon is 2 or 3 things. Dekhiye, what is happening is 1850s onwards, a few things are changing. 1750s onwards, industrial revolution had begun. 1750s onwards, industrial revolution had begun. It lasted for 100 years till 1850s. Then 100 years of industrial revolution roughly. Okay, so it began in 1750s, 60s, slowly increasing. It received a major boost in Britain during the 1830s. Okay, and by 1850s, a major British industrial class had emerged. Okay, and this was the British industrial capitalist class. Okay, now the British industrialists by now were dealing with an issue in Britain, and that was the issue of rising costs and rising production cost. But you will say, sir, they are introducing industrial revolution to lower production cost. Now you are saying, kal to keh rahe the, industrial revolution will lower cost. That is why trade pattern is getting reversed, etc. Now you are saying production cost is increasing. How? Because as देखिए क्या हुआ, पहले they started with the production and workers were being paid low wages. Okay, but sir, you said workers were had low wages in India. Now you are saying workers had low wages in Britain. No, it is always low or lower. So what you see is that relatively in 1750s, Indian wages were lower than British wages. It's all relative. In 1750s, Indian wages are lower than British wages. Okay. Now, that is why the British are looking towards partly what? Having industrial revolution, so that you have more machine based production, dependence on labor decreases, right? So Indian wages are anyways lower than the British wages. Now what is happening? So they are looking towards industrialization. As they move towards industrialization, what is happening? That now workers were being recruited where? In industries. These workers were given low wages. पर आप बोलेंगे कि sir, low wages in return for the amount of work they are doing. Workers would often work for 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours. Okay? It is not that they had limited working hours, they had unlimited working hours. जैसे आज है, आप बैंगलोर जाइए, चल रहा है, मतलब गुड़गांव जाइए, मतलब सुबह उठे, हाँ मेल, हाँ बॉस का मेल है, घर आ गए 9 बजे रात को बॉस का मेल आ रहा है, देख रहे है ना. यूएस में सीधे ऑटोमेटेड रिप्लाई जाता है, कल पढ़ेंगे और ऑफिस आवर्स में रिप्लाई होगा, रात को नहीं होगा, है ना. रात को हमारा भी जीवन है, बट इंडिया में ऐसा नहीं होता. बॉस का मेल आया, चाहे रात हो सुबह हो, है ना, कुछ भी हो, सो चलेगा, रिप्लाई करेंगे. क्यों? हम तो पैदा ही काम करने के लिए हुए, जीने के लिए थोड़ी ना पैदा हुए. हमारा जीवन का लक्ष्य ये है कि रिलायंस मस्ट बिकम फ्रॉम 1000 करोड़ टू 2000 करोड़, है ना. सो दैट इज देयर. सो basically you have 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours working hours, and often long working hours were there. Capitalist class wanted to keep cost of production low. So if there were any accidents, there was no disability benefits. Workers were denied pensions. There was no concept of pensions there. If you worked, as long as you worked, you got a pay. वो आज भी नहीं है. लेकिन आज के लोगों को पता ही नहीं है कि 2003 के बाद पेंशन बंद हो गई, राइट. न्यू पेंशन सिस्टम, देयर इज नो पेंशन where the government contributes a share, but there was no pension system here also. Workers had long worker wages, long hours, low wages, no disability benefits, no pension benefits, nothing. So workers started to unionize. Workers started to unionize, and then they said संगठन में शक्ति है ना, and then they started demanding better wages. As workers started to unionize, they started demanding better wages, and as they started demanding better wages, they started going on strikes. Unions would often conduct strikes demanding better wages. Strikes would disrupt production. Also unless strikes often ended with demanding better wages, so rising costs of production happened because of disruptions caused by strikes and the demands for better wages. And often the capitalist classes had to at times relent, because if they wanted, because of worker or trade unionism. So wages, demand for increasing wages, repeated strikes were increasing the cost of production. So ultimately it is affecting whom? The British capitalist class or industrialist class profits. Isn't it getting affected? अगर आपका cost of production increase होगा, your profit will increase or decrease? Decrease. Their profits are decreasing. So they said, ये profit decrease हो रहा है, ये नहीं allowed है. Profit must go only in one direction, up. है ना? So they said, let's go somewhere else where you have cheap everything. Raw material, India, good quality cheap cotton is available. वो यहाँ से वहाँ तक लेके जाते हैं, cost of transport भी बच जाएगा, यहीं बनाए. Cheap raw material is available here, cheap labor is available here. Indians even today are the ones who work the highest. In the educated middle class sector, in the services sector also, Indians work the longest as compared to their peers in the world. Go to France. They are looking at a 35-hour work week. हमारे यहाँ तो 24 घंटे में ही कर दें, एक दिन में. Right. In France, in Europe, the European Union is saying that we are going to move from, in some of the European countries, they are thinking of moving from a 5-day work week to a 4-day work week. And that too, 8 hours of work should also include the travel of time of commute. So, हमारे यहाँ तो, you go to Bangalore, तो आपका ऑफिस जहाँ है, आप पैदल ज़्यादा जल्दी पहुँच सकते हैं कार से. It's very common occurrence. If you go to some of the areas of Bangalore, it will take 40-50 minutes तो आराम से to go one way. तो 2 घंटा तो आपने वैसे ही दे दिया. 10-12 घंटा काम किया, 2 घंटा आने जाने में दे दिया. बस आजकल जीवन में ये सहारा है कि स्मार्टफोन है, बटन दबाते दबाते घंटा निकल जाता है. So that is there. So it is in this context you see that cheap raw material, cheap labor, and what? सबसे important, इन दोनों से भी important is one more thing, the safety of investment. The safety of investment. That now that the British government was in charge, if a British capitalist class, if the British government was in charge, if the British capitalist class made a huge investment to set up a production base here, they were rest assured that all of a sudden they could not be displaced because the British government was in charge in India. The safety of British investments were secured primarily because the British government was in charge here. Because unless and until there is a safe political climate, no big investor will come. For example, Chinese companies will never invest big time in India to set up a production base here if India-China relations are not very good. Because of the very simple reason that if you set up a 5,000 crore investment production base here and tomorrow India and China go to war, India may nationalize and take control of all Chinese investments in the region, or vice versa, China may do the same about Indian producers in that region. So no investor will set up foot here and set up a production base unless and until there is a safe political climate for their investments. Look at the other way. Increasing investments by both countries to set up production base in each other's countries can become one of the ways of strengthening relations or building more incentive for peace. देखिए, अगर अंबानी ने 50,000 करोड़ का प्लांट लगा दिया चाइना में to manufacture जियो फोन, तो इंडिया चाइना पीस इज assured. Because if there is wider conflict, China says we'll break all trade relations and nationalize all Indian investments in China, तो अंबानी जी को जाएगा नुकसान, तो भारत सरकार को हो जाएगा नुकसान. So it is, इसीलिए that is why we say international relations, that trade is one of the ways of even strengthening, trade can become one of the ways of strengthening peace. Indian Pakistan, Iran Pakistan India pipeline, TAPI, Turkmenistan Afghanistan Pakistan India pipeline, all these pipelines running across multiple countries are also termed at times as peace pipelines. That it will interlink the economies. If it will interlink the economies, there is more incentive for peace. Nobody is saying it is the assurance of peace. There is more incentive for peace. So fostering closer economic cooperations between countries can help in fostering peace, but it can only help. It does not mean that it is a guarantee that is there. Okay. So keeping all of this in mind, they said ki chalo India, make in India. Right. So they set in a number of, it is not right to call it FDI though, okay, but it is foreign investors who were now looking towards, and British investors who shifted their production base, started shifting their production base towards India. With all of this available, the cost of production was cheaper here, and they could now export from producing. India could become a manufacturing hub for British capitalist class, and from here they could export to, they could capture the Indian market anyways, they could also export to Britain and other areas. Okay. So India became a favorable destination for British investments 1850s onwards. Now comes the question, sir, what are Indian investors doing? See, for setting these industries, you required 2-3 things. One was capital. If you need to set up a big production base, you require capital. And the British and capitalist class had a lot of capital. They had accumulated huge profits already. Then also what they required was technology. And they had technology also, and they would simply import their machineries and start production here. Now the Indian capitalist class did not emerge in a major way, primarily why? Is primarily because of both limited availability of capital at their disposal, and secondly, they did not have the access to technology. They did not have the access to some of the technologies. और एक और तीसरा problem था, that what? The third problem was there was no iron and goods, iron and steel industries set up in India. Iron and steel industries are basically considered capital goods industries or intermediate industry. ये building बनी है, इसमें लगा iron और steel. कोई any infrastructure project, any industry, if it has to be set up, machines are made from steel. Any building structure uses steel, right? And that is why steel is considered a very intermediate but essential component for industrialization. If you don't have cheap, good quality steel, setting up industries would be difficult. And steel industries are very expensive to set up, and you require access to technology also. Making steel there are very different varieties of steels, okay? Low grade steel, high grade steel, this steel, this steel, the many varieties of steels. But steel making is both capital intensive and is technologically also intensive. Indians did not have this, neither the capital nor the technology to set up a number of these steel plants. They could only be set up in India by the British government. But the British government never set up a single steel plant in India. The first steel plants in India were set up by Indian industries only in the 20th century, 1905 onwards. TISCO, the Tata Iron and Steel Company, is being set up. So what do we say? ये सारी कहानी मैंने क्यों बताई? That the pattern of industrialization in India was a lopsided pattern of industrialization. The British adopted an industrialization policy where they provided a favorable investment climate and secured British capitalist investments or British investments in India, allowed them to import their machineries without any custom duty, anything, allowing them, providing a favorable investment climate, allowing and attracted British investments into India. But they adopted a policy of deliberately neglecting the setting up, or they followed a policy of deliberate neglect of the Indian emerging capitalist class by not setting up any iron and steel industries, and the Indian capitalists and the Indians did not have access to either technology or capital. That is why the growth of Indian capitalist class was much more or way more slower than the growth of the British capitalist class in India. पर सर ठीक है, at least investment is coming, jobs are being produced. Ultimately, they are setting a production base here, they are using labor here, and jobs are being produced. तो job तो मिल रही है, people are getting something on their plate, they are getting wages, they are getting jobs. What is your problem? So what is the problem? The main the cost, so though people are getting jobs, but the main earnings are going to the British. Anything else?
Sir, because in textile sector we already have jobs in India that was divided into, there was silk production and that was then come into modern machinery, it goes as a labor.
Okay. Anything else?
They used to employ Indian laborers. A lot of time they used to, there was a revolt against this.
Revolt तो देखिए हर ही जगह है. Build, see. Anything else? देखिए बड़ी सिंपल सी चीज है that basically what is happening that this is, it's not right to completely say that it's FDI primarily because even though they were setting up investments in India, which is generating jobs, it is coming at a huge cost. The cost is that the profits made by the British capitalist class were left untaxed. देखिए सैमसंग ने भी इंडिया में प्रोडक्शन बेस है, हुंडई का भी इंडिया में प्रोडक्शन बेस है. There are many automobile or mobile companies etc. which are production based in India, but these companies, their operations from India, whatever profit they make, they have to pay a tax. But the British investments in India did not have to pay a tax. That is the difference. Employment तो British भी produce कर रहे थे. Employment तो the British were also producing. The employment is being produced by foreign investments today also. But the difference is that at that point of time, the British capitalist class did not have to pay any tax. Now the independent government in India imposed the tax. That is the thing. तो अगली बार जब आपको बोले कि foreign investments is producing jobs in India, तो आप बोलना कि सर investment तो jobs produce करेगी ही. तो बड़ी obvious सी बात है. ये सब बहुत ही अभी आपके लिए थोड़ा सा अच्छा छोड़िए वो, लेकिन because we say there are some investments which produce more jobs than others. It is if an investment is happening in a labor intensive sector or in a machine or in a sector which is not very labor intensive. जैसे होता है Tata Nano ने has invested, Tatas have invested 1,000 crores in setting up an automobile plant and it has made 300 jobs. It is because the nature of that industry is such that there is more automation there. But they can also have 1,000 crore investment in the gems and jewelry sector, which will generate more jobs. Textile sector, automobiles, textile sector, gems and jewelry, they're considered more labor intensive sectors. So it's not just a function that investment, foreign investment is producing jobs. You also have to look at what is the number of jobs which are produced, what is the quality of jobs. It's not important just to produce jobs, it also has to see that what is the average wage level in that job, what are the number of jobs that has to be produced. You can't just say the investment is producing jobs. That is too lame an argument. Okay, so that is why you see all these investments. So the British produced an investment pattern in India which was lopsided and favored the British capitalist class over the needs of the Indian capitalist class. The first industry in India set up by Indians was the under Acharya P.C. Ray, the Bengal Chemicals. Okay, was one of the first industries that was being set up in India 1870s, 80s onwards. Okay, and we'll talk about Factories Act and other things also later. Okay, any doubts still here? Quickly write about the British industrial, the British investments or industrialization policy under British. As or by 1850s, almost a century into the Industrial Revolution, almost a century into the Industrial Revolution in where? Britain. The cost of production started to increase due to repeated disruptions in production due to strikes, militant trade unionism, मिलिटेंट इसलिए कह रहे हैं कि वो प्यार से बैठ के बात नहीं करते थे, तोड़ फोड़ करते थे. अमिताभ बच्चन, राइट? दे यूज्ड, yes, Marx is giving his whole theories by studying the industrial revolution in Britain. Okay, so अभी तो you right, Marx पे कभी किसी और दिन 2 मिनट. Militant, so yes, so the cost of production started to increase due to repeated disruptions in productions due to strikes, militant trade unionism, and demand for better wages. Demand for better wages. Next para you write, the British capitalist class now shifted production base towards India, as it provided cheap raw materials, cheap labor, and safe political investment climate for British capitalist class. Next para. As the British production bases were set up in India, the growth of Indian capitalist class / Indian industries was deliberately neglected as the British failed to set up any iron and steel industries. As the British failed to set up any iron and steel industries in the region. As the British failed to set up any iron and steel industries in the region.
Sir, it was deliberate attempt to
as the British did not set up any iron and steel industries in the region. Moreover, as the British did not set up any iron and steel industries in the region. Moreover, the lack of access to capital and technology further created obstacles in the growth of Indian owned industries. Further created obstacles in the growth of Indian owned industries. क्या जल्दी है, 2 मिनट रुक जाइए, पूरा लिख के जाइए, क्या हो जाएगा 5 मिनट में, 5:30 से है आपकी क्लास. In the next para you write, the profits made by the British capitalist class were largely left untaxed and thus constituted a major route of drain of wealth from India. We'll discuss this further, drain of wealth, etc., in the next class. Thank you.